All right, welcome. Yeah, good. All right, we're on. Thanks so much for joining. I think people will stream in, I'm sure, but we want to be respectful of time, and so kick off. So my name's Dave Treat, and Rob and I have both been on stage already, but Dave Treat, I lead Accenture's blockchain business globally, and
Rob Palatnick, global head of research and innovation at DTCC. For the last 12 years, I was the chief architect for DTCC, but now I've gotten a new role completely focused on research and innovation, which actually is a credit to an organization that has to do a lot of support and maintenance of existing systems and modernization of those existing systems. And now we've dedicated a segment of our budget directly to exploring things like blockchain.
So the last thing we wanted to do, because it's been a morning full of transmit, was more transmit. so we actually want to have a little bit of an interactive session, but we'll just start with just a few minutes of context setting, and then really want to interact with you around the challenges, the successes, the dynamics that you're facing as you're starting to experience what does governing these new business new blockchain-based ecosystems entail. Do you want to just start with the history of why we started this particular project and wrote this paper?
Sure. So DTCC started in, I think it was 2016, a project to replatform a credit default, a system that tracked a type of derivative transactions called credit default swaps from our mainframe to a distributed ledger solution. This has been in the press, so probably most of you have heard about, or many of you may have heard something about this project. It started from a group in the financial industry, a group of firms getting together, doing a proof of concept, asking DTCC to join the proof of concept, and then working with DTCC to do an RFP, go through the RFP process and select a vendor, and then implement the solution. So this started in 2016. The ecosystem and many of the vendors have come a long way. In 2016, there were no real production systems other than Bitcoin and Ethereum. I think had just gone live about a year earlier. So in terms of the number of vendor products and viable solutions, the number of solutions in production, 0. The number of solutions with lots of customers and existing reference points, 0. So mostly what we were reviewing were hopes, promises, and dreams. And between vendors and a couple of the smaller vendors that had the model and the idea and some of the expertise, and some of the bigger technology vendors, that's how the RFP process went. We selected a team that was composed of a company called Exoni, IBM, and R3, and we're at the point where we finished coding, we finished the solution, and now we're working with the industry on how to do the migration and the cutover. Early in the process, we realized that each firm would have to adopt this in a way that worked in their ecosystem and meshed with their system. The traditional model had been passing messages through file transfer or FPML, a message protocol for derivatives, using I think it was using Fix. It might have been using some other messaging protocol. So now calling an API, getting nodes, interacting with a blockchain model, and connecting it with their system to both transmit data, receive data, and make sure that everyone agreed on all the attributes and aspects of a match trade was going to be a completely different model. So early on in the process, we set up an oversight council, which at that point we just called a technical advisory council. And it turned out to be a group that ended up making a lot of the decision points. And every time we came to another place where, all right, should we put this in a smart contract? Should we write it in code? What does it mean? Where's the oracle of reference data going to be? It was another decision point. And this is not something we were able to do on our own. We needed to make sure we were going to be interoperating with the rest of the community. Then we started talking about things like onboarding and what the onboarding model was going to be. point after point, we soon realized we were basically establishing an overall governance model for our entire distributed ledger implementation. We actually brought in Accenture to help us lead the project of building out that governance model. And as we were building out, we realized that building a specific governance model for this project was really the framework for a governance model for almost any distributed ledger network. You needed a steering committee. You needed someone to be in charge of third parties, because there's a whole new set of third parties. The myth of this technology is it gets rid of intermediaries. The reality is it brings in a whole new set of intermediaries. It brings in network operators. It brings in software providers. It brings in different types of security models and experts in security. So understanding how to control that ecosystem, how to control operations, all of it turned into a framework, and we decided to collaborate and share this information with the broader community, which is how we resulted in a white paper.
Yeah, and so the white paper's available for download. Anyone can can go download. If you, I think the quickest way I always get there is if you Google DTCC Accenture DLT governance. That'll do it. Or we can post the link somewhere, maybe within the conference space. But if I part of the reason that we worked together on this was we also brought into the discussion a lot of our prior wounds, scars, agita around some of the early experiences of setting up and operating blockchain-based ecosystems, and just to kind of add to the mix, right? Just everything from the base layer, who's going to do key management? How are you going to ensure within the network that all the nodes stay up on the latest versions? How do we not have version control issues between nodes? How do we do onboarding? How do we do offboarding? Policy administration? The entire stack of how to effectively govern a brand new business flow with multiple brand new partners, on a new technology in an innovative way that could be that can meet the demands of that use case, which in Rob's case is the underpinnings of the entire U.S. financial infrastructure. The stakes are pretty high, so we've been focusing on that for a while. It has really interesting dimensions, and I've had a few conversations, even just one walking into the room with, I'm trying to see if you're here, a legal startup, right? The whole notion of how do you, even at a simple level, as you're starting to identify the use cases and the possibility to transform, even just the getting 6 different companies' legal teams together to agree to the construct by which you're going to work together can be a nightmare. Across every dimension, we're in a whole new landscape of what does it mean to be in a multi-party system, and it touches every level of this, and it really has been a key differentiator between successful programs and less successful programs. One of the I get asked kind of what's the secret or the insight frequently. I think that one of them. And it's a distinct. One of the things we could talk about is the differences between different types of ecosystems. The DTCC, Rob, Rob's organization implicitly is has all of the pipes, the governance, the policy, the responsibility for the ecosystem today as being a member-owned structure operating on behalf of the financial ecosystem. If I take the insurance industry as another example, right, and what was done with the Riskstream Collaborative, this is 44 insurance companies in North America getting together on a peer basis. In that instance, it was the policy. Basically, the Risk Institutes was the lobbying, policy, and education body of the industry, bringing folks together, but not on the same. They didn't have the pipes and the governance, the existing operate governance responsibilities. So different dynamic, and then you take a whole third dynamic of true just peers in the wild meeting in a room, trying to work together. One of the things from a governance perspective that has made a massive difference in these different programs is the difference between some misapprehensions initially of going in and operating on a direct democracy basis. I'm going to get 7 players around a table. there are going to be 7, we're all going to vote, and we're going to vote on everything. That works well for about a split second before the disagreements ultimately lead to a fracturing, and the efficiency of decision making is just drops off of a curve. Sorry, drops off the cliff. What has been incredibly successful, and actually I would argue the DTCC as being one of the most successful consortia projects ever, right? And not DLT related per se, but the industry, the existence of the DTCC was this notion of, within a multi-party environment, having a brand new entity stood up in the middle to serve on behalf of the community equally, right? So everyone has an equal chance to play, and you take an indirect democratic approach where that community, those players in the ecosystem, are empowering that new central entity to make the day-to-day decisions and governance choices on behalf of the community. They can be fired, they can be changed, they can be replaced, but it's the combination of fair and equal play for everyone, but the efficiency of a small group driving the day-to-day decision-making. That model has been the most successful as we look at the different ways that this has played out across industries. The direct democracies have almost always failed.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as there's two parties to any transaction or any decision, you're going to have disagreements. It's inevitable. Everyone has their own interest as their primary focus and what's in it for them, and that immediately says you need some kind of model as soon as there's two parties, nonetheless, 6 parties or hundreds. And you heard it a bit from Michael DiCastillo's panel with Honeywell, Walmart, and American Express. I think one of the last questions he had put out there was, is it a dictatorial model of governance and agreement? Is it some kind of consensus-based model, or are smart contracts going to automatically determine governance? And the answer, and you could just trust the math and trust your coders. I've been a coder, and nobody trusts me. And if you know your developers, probably half your securities, half the thing keeping your security people up at night are malicious insiders, which are mainly your coders. So starting with the premise of that model, I think in the long term probably has some weight. In the short term, figuring out how to articulate this in contracts, even what a smart contract is, because it's certainly neither smart nor a contract from a legal perspective. And every platform and every ecosystem has a completely different smart language today. New ones are emerging every single day. There are no standards and there's no agreement. So you can encode some governance structure in a basically locked-in contract model that does not interoperate, will have completely different translations or taxonomy on some other platform. So from our perspective, the first two are the dictatorial, that, all right, I'm creating something, I'm a company, and all of my customers and supply chain needs to get in line. Or second, you come up with some kind of consensus-based governance model with a steering committee, with working groups, with a structure that establishes policies and procedures and rules, completely focused on the community, for the benefit of the community, with an appropriate set of feedback mechanisms to ensure that the community is being heard. And that's the model we've chosen. We're owned by the industry. To David's point, we are unique in that we don't have public stock. We have literally no other motivation but to benefit the community and to focus on risk and risk reduction and safe and sound markets in the financial industry. The regulators expect that of us. All of our owners expect that of us. And our motivation and our compensation is directly based on that. So it is an unusual experiment in a company, but we've been doing this for almost 50 years. And the other unusual thing about us, which is probably also different than some of you in the audience and some others in this ecosystem, is we don't have an exit strategy. You put things inside of DTCC's vaults and ledgers, and we've kept them for the last 50 years, and we expect to protect your pension funds, your retirement accounts, mutual funds, teachers' funds. All of that we see as our obligation to the investing public. So when you're building a new ecosystem that's supposed to be immutable and last for decades, you're building the new pyramids of our modern era. You've got to have that long-range future in mind, and not everyone who's starting things from this is my way, this is the way I'm going to operate it, is going to take that long perspective. So bringing in a community and a consensus and taking that long view is really important to do to benefit an entire ecosystem.
So have we said enough to provoke questions? Or we can get, yeah, great.
So there are two things.
Sorry, right behind you and then up here, yeah, please.
Oh, so you're highly regulated, right? And DLT probably represents a disruption to your regulators, right? There's like not a central source to trust or reason. How were regulators involved in the process of taking on this project, and do they have a seat at the table with your governance? How do you manage that?
Actually, I mean, you're the regulated entity. You go first, and then I'll.
That is a great question, and I'll say the number one starting point with everything we do with our regulators is education. Okay, and I can't emphasize that enough because and any of you who are in regulated companies or regulated industries, you're probably on a similar trajectory, and not just with distributed ledger, with cloud. I was just at the first cloud conference hosted by the Federal Reserve in Richmond, at the Fed in Richmond in Virginia, and it was basically an education, and all the vendors were there, but it was a lot of the questions from the regulators were, why can't you have automatic interoperability? So everything I'm running on one cloud, if it fails, immediately fails over with full integrity and full operating hot to another cloud, and not really understanding the difficulty involved in replicating in real time and operating at high volume, and that every vendor is slightly different. So I'll say breadcrumbs, step by step, a lot of education is the very first part. Second, because we are overseen and every one of our functions is overseen, especially we have our highest level transaction processing regulated environment, and then we have what we call our lower tiers, which are not directly regulated and not considered critical systemic infrastructure, but most of our clients really bucket it all together. They think anything DTCC is operating or touches is going to be fully regulated and held to that highest bar. Unfortunately, that means even when we do proof of concepts, I have to spend a lot of time with our business continuity team explaining why I don't need triple redundancy on a proof of concept. And it does create speed bumps and friction and everything, but the perception is all around our brand, and if anything does go wrong, it has those implications. So our regulators are heavily involved in everything we do. We present constantly to them. They attend our board meetings, so they basically have complete visibility into DTCC, and a number of them actually have offices in DTCC's locations. So they're there all the time. I guess the key is having an appropriate operating model where you can do experimentation, and we're still learning on this, so I'm not going to say we have this down at all. And what we've learned most recently from the industry and from a number of our brethren in the financial industry and in other industries, that establishing an appropriate sandbox or playground where the communities can interoperate in a less regulated fashion and in a less production fashion and try things out is really a key stepping stone in order to get the community to get comfortable with and accept production level operations. So having that right operating model where you can move things along a trajectory from idea to proof of concept to pilot to test bed with user acceptance with regulatory oversight. I'll say another thing which is a little bit humorous is that we've long talked about providing our regulators with a node. Well, it turns out you can't provide the regulators with a gift, okay? And this is a regulation. The regulators can't take a gift, and if regulators want to get a node, they actually have to procure it, and it has to be in a congressional procurement, request. So the idea of just providing a node was a good idea, but we're still working through the mechanics of exactly how we can do that in a way that meets all of our rules.
The other side of that coin, though, is of course, if you take the U.S. regulators, right? If you take SEC 613, right, which was what, it's now 8, 9 years old, 10 years old maybe. So SEC 613, consolidated audit trail. It was the SEC's desire to basically gather every bit of trade information in capital markets, from the pricing available at point of trade all the way through clear, settle, close. It was immediately recognized as it would build the world's largest database ever, right? And be just this. It has been this gargantuan thought process, all motivated from the regulator's desire to have the transparency, auditability, control mechanisms, which are just inherent in what it is that we're building. So the desire there and the engagement is there, and I've spent more time in DC and in London and with the regulators because they're excited about the potential. So I've been very impressed with how the regulators have engaged with this particular wave of innovation. They've been more more proactive and engaged than prior thought. And then the other thing that if we can solve it right. And having spent a lot of my career in capital markets, one of the shouldn't have been a surprise parts of the use case and the business value, particularly in capital markets, but I think it applies to other industries, is if you look at the wave of regulation that came out of the financial crisis in 2008, if you were in a bank and you wanted to get your project funded, you threw the word reg in it, and more than 90% of every bank's change budget went to risk and reg. Really, still somewhat the dynamic, but it was 4 or 5 years of that was where all the spend went. And the reason was, with every new regulation, every bank had to individually read, understand, code, test, present, refine, bilaterally between them and the regulator. And so the massive amount of industry spend on coding the improvements to on an ecosystem-wide basis was a massive, massive amount of spend that was all each bank individually coding to the same standard and same things. The ability for what this technology can do to basically have shared access across an ecosystem to a shared set of business logic, and the benefits of shared ledger and the standardization that comes from this, there is the potential and the real live opportunity that for the next, fast forward, we have, DTCC's up and running with certain, products enabled by DLT. The next regulation that comes out, that ability to read, absorb, code, test, share, the improvement to that business logic being done once, because it's now on a shared basis across the industry, could save tens of billions of dollars. And so that use case is very much, on the come.
Yeah, I think to a large degree, this technology will enable, some of the things we've been working on for the last 10 years, where the regulators had initially said after the credit crisis of 2008, give us the data, show us. So the consolidated audit trail came from that. A lot of the regulatory reporting we've done around the world has come from that. And we've gone through multiple iterations of, well, can you give us more clean data? Can you give us data that actually correlates across asset classes? Can you give us, data that doesn't have exceptions? And so I'll say the different iterations we've all gone through because of, I'll say the evolution of clarity in requirements, but also our own evolution of taking high-speed, highly scaled transaction processing systems, but now making them have that additional portal of visibility. Distributed ledger answers a lot of that built in. And to a degree, that demand is starting to I don't want to say quiesce, but starting to harmonize or align with the way we're all building systems. And that's why a lot of the work we're doing with distributed ledger, we recognize what that next step is, and we can see a model for engagement with regulators and having those conversations. And maybe once they start actually getting data and seeing they could have APIs into it and potentially working with some RegTech vendors on using those APIs, they'll probably have more substantial requirements instead of just show me the data. Where we see probably a bigger shift of effort is going to be on the security side. And meeting the security requirements of the industry in a technology where security models are still somewhat evolving. So we've recently put out a framework document on how to think about security in distributed ledger, and I think that's going to be an ongoing topic of conversation.
Follow you.
Yeah.
I was looking at your answer part of the question. So is there any secret recipe for, there are two types, right? One is business governance and the other one is technology governance in this platform. So on the business governance side, is there any secret recipe that you guys follow to onboard a partner or determine who is the right partner to just go and have a node versus not having a node versus the ISO shipping? That's the first question. The second question was you actually, David, is like the voting mechanism which you just talked about, like the solutions. Are they using any sort of open source identity solutions that we are presenting? We were talking before in the previous keynote, like Ursa or Aries and Indie blockchain. So those are my two questions. The first question you can answer, Rob. I know I talked to you, but is there any secret recipe or easier way for any of the solutions of which you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, it's
tough.
I'll say the number of choices is properly consolidating. The number of stacks, fortunately, everyone in this room, likely, and everyone at this conference, have bet on a good horse. A Hyperledger, from getting a bunch of people in a room 4 years ago to where we stand today, we've come a long way. The number of people who are using the different projects and contributing to the different projects continues to grow. And if you just, we're 4 years into this part of the ecosystem, and if you think about being, 4 years into the internet, or 4 years into distributed databases, or 4 years into almost any technology, you're still well before that tipping point. And I think the amount of progress we've made over the last few years is phenomenal. It's getting the communities together and getting those groups together to say this is the right model, and that there are opportunities, like we heard in that last panel about the Food Trust Network, and no one's arguing that there should be different models about that tainted head of lettuce or whatever. Food safety is everyone's concern. Presumably safety in sound markets and across any of the industries that are involved, integrity is important to everyone, and as a result, everyone's got to make a little bit of sacrifice to get to that harmonized community model. That's where the governance and the oversight come in, is really the first step of establishing a community and figuring out what the path forward is, and that's where open source comes in as well.
I think just to add one dimension to that, I think one of the things that we are just religious about is that if you're not approaching the formation of your ecosystem with a very candid, open, dialogue around, the puts and takes around that value. Not winners and losers, but there will implicitly be in any one of these implementations a variable degree of value that each player will get. The more candid and upfront you are about that, and you're making it valuable for each participant in their own context, the better. Certainly at the other end of the spectrum, the kind of predatory, more predatory, I want to get there first and I want you to use my thing and I'm going to charge a toll, the leg has been swept out from most of those efforts. So being able to have a clear articulation of the value case up front is, it's the right thing to do no matter what. But it has been the hallmark of the more successful engagements than the rest.
I think there is the lock-in question that came up a few times this morning is an interesting one. Because we've been very focused on that, and our position, which is why we're here, has been in a decentralized, distributed model of this new technology. Not whether it's untrusted or trusted, the idea that you're going to have no single point of failure, but you're going to rely on one single commercial proprietary vendor to do everything, and you're not going to open up the hood and look at the engine and look what's in there, and you're just going to trust that vendor to do all the coding and all the smart contracts and implement the entire ecosystem, is, from our perspective, is not the intent of this model. The intent has got to be durability and resiliency, which means, we have, in the cloud, we have exit strategies. We have a bunch of things the regulators are properly putting on all of our heads to say, what's your exit strategy? If it goes wrong, what are you going to do? We're applying that same lens to what we're doing in distributed ledger. If we've got to move to another model, if we've got to, expand the number of vendors, if the vendor has its own exit strategy and, goes away, they've all cashed out, and now the two experts in crypto have gone off somewhere or died with the secrets in their head, we've all seen how that plays out. And So that, to us, from a technical perspective, is getting the community together and say, what is the model that's acceptable to this community?
The second half of your question around use of digital identity for governance frameworks is absolutely a live topic. A deep one, but yes.
I'm just asking you if you think that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if I could kind of poke you a little bit on the legal structure. You seem to indicate that we need to have some independent legal entity that represents the consortium. Can you elaborate on that? What have you seen? What works?
So I mean, just speaking from experience, right? We've run through the maze of getting 6 or 8 companies together, seeing value in pursuing a blockchain-based transformation, and then immediately getting mired down in 3 or 4 months of the bilateral MSA and legal negotiations between each party, and the food fight over whose template do we start with, which edits are accepted, and so the ability to streamline that, I think is a huge opportunity for the legal field broadly around. And it's not the legal departments within each company obviously have to continue to protect and advocate for their own company's interests. Our ability to standardize what I think is more in common than less around the multi-party ecosystems, and some standards around that, I think it will be incredibly helpful. So that was part of what I meant by that. The way around it, one way around it, is if you do stand up a brand new legal entity structure to serve on behalf of the rest, at least you're cutting out one factor's worth of legal team to legal team's interactions, right? Because it's all one set of paper that everyone's reacting to, rather than the 6 to the whatever.
And even if it's not a legal entity, getting 2 or more parties to agree on a shared structure of governance is where the friction is. And legal entity is kind of an option. It doesn't have to be a legal entity. It could be a council, a committee, a working group. There's lots of different structures. Getting agreement on what that shared model is going to be, who owns the IP, is there going to be IP, who governs the decision-making process, who turns on things or off things. It's a community. Who's allowed into the community and who's not allowed into the community, and what is the governance model for that? So.
In every bit of ironic innovation, we also focused on, could we use the shared ledger construct for the legal agreements itself? So we built a blockchain for contracts construct to share one view of the language.
Does it help the funding model? How do the members fund this sharing?
Yeah, so again, the most successful ones someone chose to invest the time up front. Frequently it's something we're willing to invest in, to define the deep value pool for the ecosystem, present it to the ecosystem as a reason to come to the table, and if you do that well enough, it should be a relatively straightforward conversation of, again, if we take the first use case that went live for the Risk-Stream Collaborative, it was a $2 billion use case for the industry. It was not hard to pony up, small millions to get 2 billion, right? So, the more you invest up front on articulating that value case, the easier it is to open the checkbooks to want to play.
I guess the other side of that is, and we see it because we're very wired, and for better or worse, we've got 40, almost 50 years of networks and MQ and messaging and ISO protocols, and we're deeply wired into an existing ecosystem, and equity processing is a great example. So stock clearing and settling on a per trade basis is much less. It costs the industry much less than 1 penny a trade, okay, to clear and settle a security, and it can be done in real time. But everyone does it in a 2-day process because people sell what they don't own and buy what they can't pay for. So there's a lot of funding and pre-funding issues. So you have an ecosystem that's tightly wired that in a long view model could probably benefit from this, but the technology itself is going to cost a lot more to implement than what exists today, and then everybody has to change. So the funding, when you're going to ask everybody to spend a couple of $1 billion in changing their ecosystem, as opposed to picking, as we heard in the panel for aerospace parts, picking a green field where there is no technology, there is no answer, there's only expense, there's only paperwork, there's only probably reconciliation issues, problems, and friction. And that they created a brand new community of liquidity and the ability to trade parts and create markets that just didn't exist before. So you're talking about from 0 to 1. That's that amazing improvement in return on value, and for probably not that big an investment. Versus, all right, we've got an entire ecosystem, we've got to lift and shift to something else.
So I actually had two questions. One to follow up with your meeting with the Federal Reserve of Richmond. I live out in that area, so I'm interested. What was their opinion or their thoughts on what you had to say that that's nice, we're educated, now go away? And then the second part of my question has to do more with the governance model itself. Can things like multi-sig capabilities within a smart contract help alleviate some of their concern of we need to set up a node? No, we can't because regulation doesn't allow us. Could that potentially be a way for them to still get a finger on the pulse of what's going on, but without having to set up their own nodes? First of all,
All right. First question, and that was a cloud conference, and there were 50 to 100 financial industry companies, and I think some card companies, some payment processors were there. We were there. A lot of custodian banks and broker dealers were there. Basically, all talking about their journey, their experience, what they've seen in the cloud, their view on resiliency. There was a panel where it was a number of the three-letter agencies, and on that panel, they would only give their first name. They wouldn't even give their last name. So it was, Josh, James, Dave, and talking about security guidelines. And actually, the NSA has published public guidelines on best practices for using the cloud. Well, it's published for the public because no, actually, it was quite the opposite. Their fear, and not to turn this into a cloud conference, but their fear was that people would be afraid of that bugaboo, that Godzilla lurking somewhere underneath it, and not use the cloud, and the amount of value. Well, that was their view, was the amount of value and the amount of security, whether it's privacy or just capabilities that you get from cloud, was so much higher than most people have on-prem. They don't want people to be afraid of it, but here's what you need to think about, because if you don't manage your credentials, if you don't manage your entitlements, if you don't have oversight and control and governance of your ecosystem and your controls, you could get into more trouble than on-prem, but if you do, it's even better. So the bottom line is the regulators listened. And that was the purpose of this conference, was to get everyone to tell. They had some of their focus on real-time interoperability. Every panel, even I think one of the larger vendors, and all the vendors were there, one of the larger vendors says that's chasing unicorns. It doesn't exist, and trying to make the same application interoperate on multiple clouds, why are you even moving to the cloud? Just keep it in your data center. But they poked and prodded at different models and where regulators can help, and where do vendors need to be regulated. And right now, we're the regulated entity if we're using the cloud. Does that ecosystem not need to be regulated? So they were asking the right level of questions. Your second question.
Potentially using like multi-sig smart contracts to give them
figure
on what's going on without having to set up their node. And
David can go into more detail. I think there's going to be multiple tactical answers that could address their problem. It's just they have requirements, and the flippant, let's give them a node, isn't an answer to a requirement, but here are the requirements. We
have to wrap up. But I guess I would just summarize to say that the value pool for them also pretty deep. We'll figure out a way, right? If we have to, obviously changing federal procurement processes is not the easiest thing in the world, but the value pool is deep enough that the motivation will be there. So, really, thank you for your time, and we're here for the rest of the week. So, happy to. I know we missed a few people's questions. Happy to pick it up over drinks or coffee.
Thank you very much.